Please. Let me hide here tonight.
What happened when she appeared at his door would force one man to choose between survival and honor. The Wyoming wind howled across the endless grasslands as twilight bled into darkness, and somewhere between the shadow of the buttes and the distant glow of a kerosene lamp, a young Cheyenne woman collapsed against a fence post, her lungs burning, her eyes blazing with fierce determination, despite the mud and blood that streaked her bronzed face. Her elk-hide dress hung in tatters from a brutal escape. The beaded belt around her waist was broken, and her ankles bore deep purple bruises where iron shackles had cut into her flesh just hours before. Every step toward that distant homestead felt like her last, but she forced herself forward, driven by pure survival instinct toward the only light visible for miles. But here's what neither of them knew yet. The choice he was about to make would change both their lives forever. Inside the weathered homestead, Benjamin Cole, a cattle rancher with silver streaking his dark beard and a reputation for keeping strangers at rifle length, was finishing his evening coffee when a desperate scratching at his door made him freeze mid-sip. 3 years of living on the edge of tribal lands had honed his instincts to razor sharpness. He moved silently to the entrance, his weathered hand closing around the Winchester propped beside the doorframe. But when he pulled the door open, rifle raised, what he found was no ambush. It was a woman barely clinging to consciousness, her braided hair matted with prairie dust and pine needles, her dark eyes swimming with equal parts terror and defiant hope. She rasped through cracked lips, "Please, let me hide here tonight." Benjamin's finger relaxed on the trigger. He'd witnessed raids, had buried neighbors after dawn attacks, and understood that sheltering her could bring death to his doorstep by sunrise. Yet something in her trembling frame, something desperately human, cut through the calloused armor he'd built around his heart since losing his family. He lowered the rifle and stepped aside without speaking. She stumbled past him into the amber warmth of the small homestead, her body rigid with exhaustion, but her gaze still alert, cataloging every shadow as if the entire world had become her enemy. Benjamin filled a tin cup with well water and placed it carefully on the rough-hewn table. She drank greedily, her hands trembling so violently the water splashed across her torn dress. When she finally found her voice, it carried the unbearable weight of fresh trauma. Wait, because what she told him next would haunt Benjamin Cole for the rest of his life. Her camp had been attacked by slave traders 3 nights ago, white men with iron chains and no mercy. She'd watched her sister dragged away screaming, had seen her uncle shot down like an animal when he tried to fight back. She'd been bound in the back of a wagon, but when it overturned crossing a ravine in the darkness, she'd crawled free and run. She'd been running ever since, knowing that by now they'd discovered her escape and come hunting. The potbelly stove crackled between them as she spoke, and Benjamin felt a familiar heaviness settle behind his ribs. He knew this territory was lawless, that tomorrow could bring armed men demanding he surrender her, or worse, men who'd shoot first and ask questions never. Yet as she sat there afterward, staring into the dancing flames with eyes too old for her young face, he felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, even if only for one night. She watched him with the wary intensity of a cornered wolf, shoulders still tensed, ready to bolt if she sensed betrayal. Benjamin, without wasting words, began arranging a wool blanket on the narrow cot in the corner room. Outside, coyotes yipped at the rising moon, and the vast darkness beyond those log walls seemed ready to swallow her whole the moment she stepped back into it. She whispered her name like a confession. Nitika. Benjamin nodded once, storing it in his memory like something precious and dangerous. Hours crawled by in tense silence. Benjamin cleaned his Winchester methodically, pretending not to notice how her eyes tracked his every movement. Nitika wrapped herself in the blanket but refused to lie down, instead sitting upright with her knees drawn to her chest, as if sleep itself was a luxury that could get her killed. The firelight painted shifting shadows across her face, revealing both bone-deep exhaustion and unbreakable will. Benjamin understood that trust out here wasn't given freely. It was earned in blood, or not at all. As midnight approached, a strange stillness settled over the homestead. Outside, the wind battered the shutters like fists demanding entry, and the world felt massive and merciless. But here's the part that will shock you. Inside, for the first time in 72 hours of running, Nitika felt the tiniest flicker of safety. The wild horses couldn't drag that admission from her lips. She studied this quiet rancher, who'd taken her in without demanding explanations or payment, and wondered what kind of man opened his door to danger without hesitation. In his weathered silence, she sensed not coldness, but a deep, unspoken understanding of loss and loneliness that mirrored her own. When her eyes finally closed, just for a heartbeat, she dreamed not of chains or screaming, but of the fragile possibility that not every pale-skinned stranger was an enemy. A rooster's distant crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, though the eastern sky remained black as gunpowder. Nitika jerked awake, her heart hammering against her ribs as the quiet creak of the door triggered every survival instinct she possessed. Benjamin had already risen, stepping onto the wooden porch with his rifle, scanning the horizon with grim vigilance. The plain stretched empty and colorless, but he'd lived here long enough to know that emptiness could be the most dangerous illusion of all. Nitika moved silently to the window, her bare feet soundless on the planked floor, and observed him. The weak pre-dawn light outlined his broad frame beneath that faded work shirt, and she realized he wasn't just a man protecting his property. There was something in the way his eyes searched the distance, a haunted quality that spoke of many losses carried in silence. When he returned inside, he found her standing by the door, ready to leave. "If I stay here, they'll track me down," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in the darkness. "And when they come, they'll kill you for hiding me." Benjamin set his rifle against the wall and shook his head slowly. "You're not walking out there alone." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not pity in his lined face, but iron resolve. Still, she protested. "You don't understand what you're risking." His answer came quiet, but immovable as bedrock. "Out here, sometimes the only thing separating a man from an animal is doing what's right. I'm not letting you walk to your death." Her throat constricted at his words. The silence between them stretched taut as the morning light strengthened outside, painting the harsh prairie in shades of amber and gold. But even as dawn broke across the Wyoming grasslands, a faint sound shattered the fragile peace. Distant voices carried on the wind. Nitika's entire body went rigid. "Riders," she breathed. "They found me." She could tell by the rhythm of the approaching sound that they were searching systematically, methodically, the way hunters track wounded prey. Benjamin grabbed his Winchester, his expression carved from stone, his jaw set like a steel trap. "Get away from the windows," he ordered, but she didn't move. "They're after me," she whispered urgently. "If you fight them, they'll murder you where you stand." But you won't believe what he said next. He glanced at her, and there wasn't a trace of fear in those weathered eyes, only stubborn determination born from principles stronger than self-preservation. "Maybe they will," he said, checking his rifle's chamber. "But I'm not the kind of man who hands someone over to slavers." The next minutes stretched impossibly thin, the voices growing louder, the thundering of hooves approaching like a death sentence. Nitika's chest tightened as memories of her village's destruction flooded back. The faces of those she'd lost, the screams she'd never forget. Benjamin took position at the window, rifle ready, and she knew with absolute certainty that this man was prepared to die defending a stranger he'd met just hours ago. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the stove, her hand steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. If he was willing to fight for her freedom, she wouldn't let him stand alone. The riders were close now, close enough that she could hear individual voices barking orders, coordinating their search pattern. Benjamin looked at her one final time, something unspoken passing between them, an understanding that whatever happened in the next few minutes would be written in gunpowder and blood. "Stay low," he said quietly. "And whatever happens, you run if you get the chance." But Nitika shook her head, gripping that iron poker like a war club. "I'm done running." The first rider appeared at the edge of the property, just as the sun broke fully over the horizon, painting the confrontation in harsh morning light. And in that moment, Benjamin Cole and Nitika stood side by side, two people from different worlds united by something more powerful than fear, the unbreakable human need to stand for what's right, even when standing means dying. If this story of courage and impossible choices has gripped your heart, if you felt the weight of that Wyoming dawn and the power of standing your ground against evil, then stay with us. The bullets are about to fly, and you won't believe who survives and who doesn't. Subscribe and ride with us into the explosive conclusion of this frontier tale.